Buckle up for the A-Team. Brad Blakeman, of course, is a former deputy assistant to George W. Bush. Leslie Marshall is a progressive radio talk show host and a Fox News contributor. James Freeman, an assistant editor for the Wall Street Journal editorial page and a Fox News contributor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Leslie, you're the Democrat at the table.
Yes.
There's a lot of arguing. I get it that the folks who may have to drop out soon, they're trying hard to interrupt and get their voice in there. But does it really help the Democrats to have such a food fight?
Well, it doesn't help the party as far as unity, obviously, but I think that's what I saw last night was the moderate Democrats really pleading to the people watching and fighting for the soul of the party. And a lot of people feel, myself included, that if Bernie Sanders continues to talk like he does and continues to put forth items on his agenda that not only don't add up financially, but can't pass with votes, the Democratic Party is going to be doomed. I mean, the polls can't all be wrong.
To be clear, who are the moderate Democrats that you're talking about?
Joe Biden, Bloomberg, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar.
Worth asking, right? Based on some
relative term.
How about better? Everybody but Elizabeth Warren, because she kind of is in between where Bernie is and the moderates leaning more toward Bernie.
Brad?
This is the year of the socialist Democrat. Whether they like it or not, either it's going to be a nominee or it's going to be a platform. But either way, they are already wed to socialist democratic policy.
Kathy Arayu, she's a Latina. She writes on FoxNews.com this morning, Dems must come together to stop Sanders' takeover of party in wake of Castro praise. Quote, Sanders doesn't even know what his platform of socialism is. He grew up in the U.S. under a Democratic government with little to no experience of socialism's foundations. And yet, James, people are buying in.
Well, I think actually it was a bad night for him and for socialism, and I'm hoping a lot of voters were watching. I think what his opponents finally exposed about him. He's laid out the payroll tax, which is going to hit every worker.
The wealth tax as well, he says, will pay for Medicare for
Right, that's right. Yeah, actually, we could spend a lot. He said he could take a few hours talking about all the taxes, but to try and summarize, there are a few tens of trillions that he has not disclosed. But what we saw last night is that he is what he's always been. He's basically the angry, uninformed college freshman who never grew up. And the opponents kind of exposed it in different ways. You saw his Senate colleagues pointing out he's incompetent. He never gets anything done. And you saw Pete Buttigieg and others showing that he hasn't taken 5 minutes to think through the economics. And you ask yourself, how could you propose turning upside down the entire healthcare economy, the entire energy economy, et cetera, without thinking through any of the repercussions, the costs, how you pay for it? Only an ideologue would propose that. And that's where you see when he's still amazingly regurgitating communist propaganda about these murderous regimes. I hope a lot of people watched it, because this is the Bernie Sanders you might get as president, and I wouldn't count on him being incompetent, even though his colleagues in the Senate think that.
Other than
what
that,
if he's
Leslie,
not?
how's your party doing?
Well, first of all, it's not like you're seeing 80 and 90% of the people out there supporting him. And we do have to look at, he does have a revolution, a movement, very similar to what Donald Trump had in 2016. The Bernie supporters are die-hard Bernie supporters. We saw that in 2016, and we're seeing that now. We also know that a caucus and a primary voter is very different than a voter in the general election, but we've got to get to the general election, obviously, and have the right candidate in the general election. But I want to say something, because I said it before here on Fox News Channel. I got a lot of flack from Bernie supporters who I was literally, we're on the same team. I lived in South Florida in the late 80s and early 90s. I have friends that were raped by Fidel Castro's regime and army. I know people that have suffered. I know people that crawled their way onto the beaches of Miami after their boats fell apart. And, yeah, there was free healthcare. Yeah, there was literacy. But you had torture. You had unlawful imprisonment. You had rape. You had the suffering of the Cuban people cannot just be wiped away. And you cannot say that I'm a democratic socialist when people are saying, ergo you're a socialist, ergo you're a communist, and then support a communist dictator with your words.
Can you imagine your party supporting him based on what we've heard him say over the past several days?
Look, I've said, and this is, I get flack for this again. If he's I will vote for who the nominee is. I can't stand what he said about Castro. I can't stand that he doubles down on it and that he doesn't apologize for it. And I am concerned about the soul of my party if he is our nominee, and I am concerned if we will win in 2020 if he is a nominee.
Can I just pivot to something else? Michael Bloomberg had a horrible debate last week. We all know that. It may be a little better last night, but still kind of struggled. Here's an exchange to get to something else with Elizabeth Warren. They went at it in Vegas and went at it again last night on comments he allegedly. So, Brad, at least he pushed back there. Last time he didn't do such a great job. But then right after that, there were boos. It sounded like maybe some Democrats thought Elizabeth Warren went too far.
Well, it was a cheap shot, number one. Number two is she told a debunked story. The story she told about being fired basically for being pregnant was not true. So she doubles down on a falsehood. And then Bloomberg tries to fight back, but then at the end of his retort, what does he say? Well, if I said something that she interpreted, no, either you said it or you didn't. He should have come out strongly and said, this is false, I never said it. The fact is, he did not close the door on Elizabeth
But his
Warren.
campaign we spoke to at the top of the 9 o'clock hour, and for their part, Mike Bloomberg's part, he feels that the release of those 3 women from the non-disclosure agreements following the last debate should have been enough. He says Elizabeth Warren's just going to keep asking for more, James.
Yeah, I think it's effective for her. I guess she finally went after Bernie Sanders a little bit, too. You kind of thought after that last debate she was auditioning to be Bernie's vice president, perhaps. But she did go after. I think she's had 2 good debates here, basically challenging a bunch of her rivals. I'm not sure it'll help. But if we could just say one more thing, this healthcare myth that Bernie keeps peddling. If you read in the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, the healthcare section, it sounds a lot like how he describes Medicare.
Well, I'm going to have to get my copy of that. I don't have it in front of me.
In that country, it almost doesn't exist for many people.
Can I make a comment about that?
Of medicine, of doctors, of everything you need to be well.
Not that, but Elizabeth Warren, the reason she didn't go after Bernie, you have a hard time when you go after Bernie Sanders because the supporters go after you big time. It doesn't help her. It hasn't helped her to go after Bernie. It has helped her to go after Bloomberg, and that's why she did it last night, because she did it in the last debate, and it helped her.
Well, it didn't stop the attacks on Bernie Sanders. Throw off that first full screen that we have on we tallied up the number of times that each candidate was attacked on the debate stage. Bernie Sanders, topping the list, got the most, 19, and guess what? He threw it back. He was attacked 33 times, and then he went on the attack 19 times. Bloomberg was number 2 as far as being on the receiving end. What about the Trump campaign response to what we saw last night? Here is the statement from the Trump campaign. The Democratic Party is a hot mess. And tonight's debate was further evidence that not one of these candidates is serious or can stand toe-to-toe with President Trump. It does not matter who emerges from the carnage. President Trump will dominate in November. Eslie.
When I was watching the Republicans debate prior to the 2016 election, I thought hot mess when people were talking about hand size, and I was hearing insults coming as if we were at a middle school cafeteria, after somebody lost the school game. I have to say, did it look like a hot mess? I felt there should have been more control by the moderator, certainly. But this is what happens. This is what happens whether you're Democrats or you're Republicans. Everybody's trying to push that king or queen off the mountain to take their spot. And that's why everybody's going to attack the front.
As we wrap it up, we haven't gotten to Joe Biden yet. And there are some pundits saying, look, this was his best debate yet, the 10th debate, better late than never, perhaps. But yet there was a whopper in there where at one point he said 150 million people have been killed by gun violence since 2007. That would mean half the population of America. Clearly was a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes, but he can't get away from these gaps.
Anything for granted. You can run Mickey Mouse, and you may have to come to that, and it's going to be a close election because the country is so divided. So we take nothing for granted. Donald Trump has something Democrats don't have, and that's a record.
Yeah, I think it makes sense that he's got a strange gun policy, given that he thinks half the country's been killed by firearms.
All right.
It would be Minnie Mouse, by the way, not...
Right. So we're going to have to check in with Disney World. We're going to have to get that Venezuelan healthcare book. We got a lot of homework to do. We'll have you back.
Thank you all.